Biomed Nexus Daily Updates, your essential biotech, medtech, and pharma recap. No noise, just what matters. TLDR Novartis won full FDA approval for Fabhalta in IgA nephropathy, turning a kidney disease that had few options into a genuine three-way race. Vera's Trutacna is already approved, and Vertex's povetacicept has a November 30th decision date. J&J opened Q2 earnings season soft, with shares slipping as oncology sales missed expectations. That sets the tone for a heavy earnings week. GSK killed camlipixant after mixed phase 3 data in chronic cough, walking away from what analysts had pegged as a potential blockbuster. The China deadline passed Friday with no public reveal as expected, while Chinese drug makers have now signed more than 100 licensing pacts with US companies. CSL Seqirus shipped the first flu vaccines of the 2026-27 US season, targeting the H3N2 strain that drove last year's surge. Executive takeaway watch IgA nephropathy, because in the span of 2 weeks it went from a quiet kidney disease to one of the most competitive new markets in nephrology. Novartis just won full FDA approval for Fabhalta to slow kidney decline in IgAN, converting an earlier accelerated approval into the real thing. That puts 3 drugs in play almost at once. Vera's Trutacna, the first dual BAFF and APRIL inhibitor, was approved at the start of the month. Fabhalta now has a full label. And Vertex's povetacicept is under review with a November 30th decision date. IgAN is a progressive disease that damages the kidneys over years and long lacked good options. Now patients will have several, and the companies will fight over prescribers, formularies, and the data that distinguishes similar mechanisms. This is what a market looks like when the science finally cracks a disease. We flagged the Vera versus Vertex race 2 weeks ago when Vera beat Vertex to market. Novartis just made it a 3-way contest, and the November Vertex decision is the next flag on the calendar. Now this week's thread to watch. Q2 earnings season is here, and it is the first hard numbers read on whether the industry is as healthy as the deal-making and the mood suggest. J&J opened the season with a stumble, its shares slipping as oncology sales came in light. That is one company and one quarter, but it is a reminder that beneath the record M&A and the buzzing IPO window, the actual businesses still have to perform. Over the next 2 weeks, the big pharmas report, and we will be listening for 3 things: how aggressively management signals more deal-making, what they say about China exposure with the congressional probe fresh, and whether the GLP-1 franchises are holding their trajectory. That is our through line for the week, and we will pay it off Friday with what the prints actually revealed. One more to keep in view. Friday's China deadline passed exactly as we said it would, with the company's responses going to the committee rather than the public, so there was no dramatic reveal. Meanwhile, the deal flow told its own story. Chinese drug makers have now formed more than 100 licensing pacts with US firms. The politics grind on, the deals keep closing. Read full analysis. Nephrology IgA nephropathy just became a 3-way race, and the science cracking it is the real story. NVS, Vera, VRTX, the FDA granted full approval to Novartis's Fabhalta, iptacopan, to slow kidney function decline in adults with primary IgA nephropathy at risk of progression, converting an earlier accelerated approval, according to the Pharma letter and Fierce Pharma. It lands in a market that suddenly has real competition. Vera's Trutacna won approval at the start of July as the first dual BAFF and APRIL inhibitor, and Vertex's povetacicept has a November 30th decision date. 3 drugs, 3 mechanisms, 1 disease that not long ago had almost nothing. For patients, this is the payoff of years of research into the immune drivers of kidney damage. For the companies, it is the start of a commercial fight where similar mechanisms mean the winners will be decided by prescriber habit, payer coverage, and whatever data separates them. We flagged Vera beating Vertex to market 2 weeks ago. Novartis just turned a duel into a three-way race. Earnings J&J opened earnings season soft, and the numbers now have to back up the mood. J&J kicked off Q2 earnings with shares slipping as oncology sales missed expectations, according to Biopharma Dive. It is a cautionary, open to a season that arrives with the sector in its best spirits in years, buoyed by record deal-making, a friendlier FDA, and a reopened IPO window. The J&J miss is a reminder that sentiment and performance are different things. The big pharmas report over the next 2 weeks, and the calls will test whether the optimism is earned. We are watching 3 things: how hard management leans into more M&A, what they say about China exposure with the probe still live, and whether the GLP-1 leaders are holding their growth. Those answers, not the mood coming out of BIO, are what tell you where the second half is really headed. Respiratory GSK walked away from a potential blockbuster after the data came in mixed. GSK ended development of camlipixant after mixed Phase 3 results from its CALM-1 and CALM-2 trials in refractory chronic cough, according to Fierce Biotech. Analysts had viewed the P2X3 receptor antagonist as a potential blockbuster and a key pipeline catalyst, so cutting it is a real blow. Refractory chronic cough is a stubborn, undertreated condition, and camlipixant was one of the more advanced attempts to address it. The decision fits a pattern we have seen from GSK under Luke Meals this year, including walking away from its Electa Neuropact after those drugs failed. When the data disappoint, GSK cuts fast rather than throwing good money after bad. That discipline is defensible, but 2 abandoned late-stage programs in a month puts more weight on the assets GSK is keeping, including the Nuvalent lung cancer drugs it paid $10.6 for. China, the deadline passed quietly, and the deals kept coming. Friday's deadline for Merck, AbbVie, Lilly, Pfizer, and BMS to answer the House Select Committee on China came and went without a public reveal, exactly as we expected since the responses go to the committee rather than the press. What is visible is the deal flow, and it has not slowed. Chinese drug makers have now formed more than 100 licensing pacts with US companies, according to Biopharma Dive. The through line we tracked for a month holds. The political pressure is real. The responses will surface in fragments over the coming weeks, and the industry keeps signing. The fight that matters remains the Biotech Investment National Security Act, which would route these deals through Treasury review and still awaits a committee vote. That is the story to watch through the fall, not the deadline that just passed. Vaccines flu season prep started, aimed at last year's troublemaker. CSL Seqirus began shipping influenza vaccines for the 2026-27 US season, according to the Pharma letter, targeting the H3N2 subclade K strain that drove last season's historic surge. Early shipping helps providers prepare, and the strain match matters, since last season's severity was tied partly to how the circulating virus diverged from the vaccine. It is a routine but important marker that the respiratory season is coming, and after a rough prior year, the strain targeting will be watched closely. Quick hits. Lilly's Atai-Beckley terms firmed up. The psychedelics deal is $2, $8B upfront, and up to $3-8B total, and reporting tied the accelerating research environment partly to a Trump executive order on psychedelics. It is roughly Lilly's 15th deal of the year. The FDA keeps rewinding makery. Acting Commissioner Kyle Diamantas walked back his predecessor's practice of making policy through medical journal articles, another step in the reversal pattern we have tracked since the spring. Danaher is buying again. Its Leica Biosystems unit agreed to acquire StatLab Medical Products, strengthening its diagnostics and pathology portfolio. More evidence of the medtech consolidation we flagged last week. Takeda posted Phase 3 data for zasocitinib its next-generation oral TYK2 inhibitor, advancing a drug it hopes can compete in inflammatory disease. The week in review, Monday to Wednesday, AstraZeneca's Wainua failed in ATTR while the company signed its fifth China deal, a 600 meters Dizal license. The Padcev bladder data from ASCO became a label. Thursday, Biogen's anti-tau data validated the science but dropped the stock 8%. Celcuity won its first approval. Friday, Lilly bet up to 3 to 8B on psychedelics. Merck cracked the first oral PCSK9. The China deadline passed quietly. Novo's Wegovy pill cleared Europe. Weekend, Novartis won full IgA approval for Fabhalta. GSK killed camlipixant. J&J opened earnings season with an oncology miss. Red, full analysis, Biomed, Nexus. Pro, institutional intelligence. Brief, how the IgA nephropathy race gets decided. 3 drugs are now converging on IgA nephropathy, and because their mechanisms overlap, the competition will be won on factors beyond the science. Here is the map. Vera's Trutacna is the first dual BAFF and APRIL inhibitor approved, dosed once weekly by auto-injector, and it has a first-mover lead of a few weeks. Novartis's Fabhalta, an oral complement inhibitor, now has full approval and the advantage of Novartis's commercial scale and an oral format. Vertex's povetacicept, also targeting the BAFF and APRIL pathways, awaits a November 30th decision and would enter last, but with Vertex's considerable resources behind it. The mechanisms matter for differentiation. Fabhalta hits the complement system, a different node than the BAFF and APRIL axis that Trutacna and povetacicept target. That gives Novartis a cleaner differentiation story, while Vera and Vertex will be fighting over a more similar mechanistic space where the distinctions come down to dosing, safety, and the proteinuria and kidney function data each can show. The commercial read. First mover advantage is real in a market like this, where nephrologists build comfort with a drug, and payers are slow to add similar agents, which favors Vera and Novartis over Vertex, but format and franchise matter too. An oral option like Fabhalta appeals where an injection does not, and Novartis and Vertex both have deeper commercial muscle than Vera. The November 30th Vertex decision is the next catalyst, and if povetacicept shows a differentiated profile, it can still take share despite entering last. For investors, the read-through is that IgAN is now a real market worth billions, and the value accrues to whoever wins the prescriber and payer battles, not necessarily to the best mechanism on paper. Watch the launch trajectories and the head-to-head data as it emerges. 3 questions for earnings. Season J&J opening Q2 with an oncology miss is a useful splash of cold water. Here is what actually matters as the big pharmas report over the next 2 weeks. First, deal-making intentions, with 4 deals already clearing $10 billion in guaranteed proceeds and the M&A wave running hot. Every large cap will be asked what they plan to buy. Listen for how aggressively management signals continued acquisitions versus returning cash. The tone sets expectations for whether the second half pace holds. Second, China exposure. With the congressional probe fresh and the deadline just passed, analysts will press on China strategy. Watch for careful reassurance and for any hint that a company is reconsidering its China pipeline. The gap between what executives say and what their companies do, as AstraZeneca showed by signing 5 deals during the probe, is itself the signal. Third, GLP-1 trajectory. For Lilly and Novo, the questions are supply, Medicare bridge uptake, and the next-generation pipeline. Evaluate projects. Lilly's tirzepatide franchise becomes the biggest blockbuster ever, topping $70 by 2032. The calls test whether that path holds and whether Novo's oral push is closing the gap. The J&J miss matters because it punctures the assumption that a rising tide lifts everyone. Sentiment is high, but individual businesses still have to execute. And oncology, one of the most competitive areas in the industry, is where misses show up first. If more large caps stumble on specific franchises this season, the narrative of a uniformly healthy sector gets more complicated, and the barbell we keep flagging, flush at the top and thin underneath, starts to look like it applies to product portfolios too, not just financing. GSK's fast cuts, strength or warning GSK killing camlipixant after mixed Phase 3 data, weeks after walking away from its Electa Neuropact, raises a real question about the company's pipeline. Is the fast cutting a sign of discipline or of a pipeline running thin? The case for discipline. Under Luke Meals, GSK has shown it will not sink more money into programs whose data disappoint. That is genuinely valuable. The industry is littered with companies that pushed marginal assets into expensive Phase 3 trials or launches and paid for it. Cutting camlipixant and the Electa drugs quickly preserves capital for better bets and reflects a management team willing to make hard calls. The case for concern. 2 abandoned late-stage programs in a month thins the near-term pipeline, and it puts enormous weight on the assets GSK is keeping. The $10 6B Nuvalent acquisition, its largest deal in a decade, now carries even more of the growth expectation. When a company cuts fast, it needs a deep bench behind the cuts, and each abandoned program raises the stakes on what remains. GSK also faces its own patent pressures, which makes replenishing the pipeline urgent. Our read. The discipline is real and preferable to the alternative, but discipline only works if the remaining pipeline delivers. GSK is making the right individual decisions while accumulating a portfolio-level risk, fewer shots on goal, more weight on each. The Nuvalent lung cancer drugs and the rest of the retained pipeline now have to carry the load. Watch the zidesamtinib and neladalkib progress closely, because they are increasingly central to the GSK growth story, and the margin for further disappointment is shrinking. Catalyst calendar date event tickers Q2 earnings big pharma reports over the next 2 weeks. Multiple July 22, comment window, closes on FDA expedited. IND pilot, multiple July 31, Section 232 pharma tariffs, effective large companies. Multiple August 2026 Replimune RP1 FDA response. Repl August 22 Capricorn, Duramio PDUFA AdCom pending, Capillate, July FDA Advisory Committee. Expected on Capricorn Duramio Cap, Imminent Revolution. Medicines, CNPB filing RVM imminent Lilly Foundayo, T2D filing under CNPV LLY Ongoing Biotech Investment National Security Act, awaits committee vote multiple Q3 2026 Revolution, Daraxon Recib approval projected, Truist, RVMD Q3 2026 Unicure, Huntington's gene therapy, under review, Correct 3, 2026 Regan XBIO Duchenne, gene therapy, BLA filing RGNX Q3, 2026 GSK, Nuvalent, close expected GSK Q3, 2026 ABV, Apogee, Vertex, Crinetics, Ipsen, deals, close expected multiple Q3, 2026 Merck, KGaA Biotechnic, close expected MKKG, IM26 Zidesamtinib and Neladalkib, PDUFAs, ROS1, ALK, GSK New VLH2, 2026 Merck, SAC TMT global filings expected MRKH2, 2026 Fondeo, T2D regulatory action expected LLY 2026 TriumphH2 and TriumphH3 readouts, Retatrutide, LLI Septi 19 Ultragenics, UX111 PDUFA, Sanfilippo Type A, Raricept 29 Section 232 pharma tariffs, effective, all others, multiple Nov 30 Vertex, Povetacicept, PDUFA, IgA Nephropathy, VRTX DICA 2026, Minerales, Lorundrostat, Purdue Familys 2027 Retatrutide launch anticipated, BMO, Ledex, Semash and Lilly, investment community meeting LLY IgA Nephropathy turned into a 3-way race, and the November Vertex decision is the next flag. J&J opened earnings soft, which is the thread we are watching all week, and GSK keeps cutting fast. What are you watching? Reply to this email. Visit the Pro Hub Read. Full article sponsorship slots for 2026 are limited. See packages and pricing. New Biomed Nexus Signals. Weekly sales intelligence for life sciences BD teams. Learn more